I never expected returning to my childhood home on Elm Street to dredge up more than old memories. But on that chilly autumn evening, as the sun sank behind gnarled trees, I felt an unease that crept under my skin like a cold draft. I had driven past the old neighborhood countless times, but tonight, the street seemed different, almost as if it were alive. Stepping out of my car, I noticed that the familiar houses were shrouded in deep shadows, their windows dark and unwelcoming. As I walked toward the house, the sound of my footsteps echoed too loudly in the empty street. That's when I first saw them, slender figures moving just beyond the edges of lamplight. They weren't entirely human. Their movements were jittery, like frames in a broken film reel. I told myself it was just my imagination, but a chill told me otherwise. Inside, the silence of the old house was oppressive. I could almost hear the heartbeat of the building itself. In the attic, I discovered a dusty chest filled with old journals and photographs. One journal belonged to my late neighbor, Mr. Holloway, who had once warned me about the shadows that never leave. His trembling handwriting recounted strange encounters on Elm Street, unexplainable whispers, movements in the corner of one's eye, and the sensation of being watched by something that wasn't there. Later that night, while I sat reading by the weak light of a dying candle, I heard a slow, deliberate creak on the stairs. The sound wasn't the normal settling of an old house. It was as if someone, or something, was pacing patiently. I pressed my ear to the wood, and the sound stopped abruptly. Then, as if in response to my fear, the shadows outside the window began to twist and merge, forming shapes that resembled human faces, their features contorted in silent screams. I fled the house that night, leaving behind the secrets of Elm Street. Yet, even now, I can't shake the feeling that those shadows follow me, a reminder that some memories should remain buried, and some streets are better left untraveled after dark. I had always been drawn to abandoned places, and the decrepit lighthouse on the edge of Blackwater Bay was irresistible. Local legends spoke of ghostly lights and eerie voices that had led sailors to their doom. Determined to document the truth, I set out one foggy night with my camera and notebook. The path to the lighthouse was overgrown and treacherous, swallowed by wild brambles and salt-laced wind. As I neared the towering structure, its white paint peeled like sunburned skin, I felt a disquieting presence. The air was thick with the smell of seaweed and decay, and every step echoed as though I were trespassing on sacred ground. Inside, the spiral staircase creaked under my weight. With each step upward, the sound of crashing waves below mingled with whispers that seemed to seep from the very walls. At the top, in the beacon room, I set up my camera. The vast, stormy sea stretched before me, and the lighthouse lens pointed toward a distant, flickering light that shouldn't have been there. Then the whispers grew into voices, a chorus of mournful cries that spoke of lost lives and unfinished business. I recorded the sounds, my heart pounding as I listened to the ghostly tales of sailors who'd perished in the treacherous waters. One voice, distinct from the others, pleaded for release, warning of an impending doom if the lighthouse was left undisturbed. As I descended, the atmosphere shifted, the temperature plummeted, and the walls seemed to close in. I realized that the lighthouse wasn't simply haunted, it was a beacon for the souls trapped between life and death. In a final, desperate moment, I glanced back upward. The spectral light in the distance had grown brighter, and I understood. The lighthouse was calling out, reaching for me to join its eternal watch over the restless dead. When I first moved into the quiet cul-de-sac of Maple Grove, I was charmed by the picture-perfect suburban life. Neat lawns, friendly neighbors, and the promise of a fresh start. But as dusk fell on my third week, an unsettling change began to permeate the neighborhood. It started subtly. A neighbor's dog that howled in unison every night at exactly midnight, and streetlights that flickered even in the absence of a storm. One evening, while unpacking boxes, I noticed a pattern, strange symbols etched in the gravel of the walkway, patterns I hadn't seen before. They seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight. Curiosity turned to dread as I began to overhear hushed conversations between residents. Late at night, through partially opened windows, I heard whispered chants and the rhythmic tapping of what sounded like ritualistic drumming. It wasn't long before I discovered a hidden door in my own basement, one that I swore hadn't been there before. Behind it lay a narrow, winding staircase leading into darkness. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, I descended into a subterranean chamber where I found a gathering of my neighbors. Their faces were blank, their eyes distant, as they performed a bizarre ritual around a flickering candle. At the center of the circle lay an ancient book, its pages filled with cryptic incantations and unsettling drawings of unknown creatures. In that moment, I realized that Maple Grove wasn't a normal suburb. It was the epicenter of a cult, its members bound by a dark pact with something beyond human comprehension. I fled that night, but the memories haunt me still. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the distant drumbeats calling from a neighborhood that no longer exists for me, a suburb where the line between normalcy and nightmare has long since vanished. It began on an unusually quiet night. I was half asleep when my old radio crackled to life, interrupting the static with a distorted voice that whispered in a language I couldn't understand. The broadcast was brief, a series of eerie tones and fragmented messages, and then silence. I assumed it was a glitch, but the next night, the same broadcast returned, more insistent and haunting than before. Intrigued and unnerved, I started to record the midnight signal, analyzing every pause and inflection. The messages hinted at a secret hidden deep within the city, a location where time itself seemed to warp. Armed with nothing more than my recorder and a burning curiosity, I set out to trace the source of the transmission. My search led me to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, its facade scarred by time and neglect. Inside, the remnants of a once bustling radio station lay in disarray, broken equipment, scattered papers, and an overwhelming sense of despair. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt the oppressive weight of unseen eyes. Every creak and echo suggested that I was not alone. In a hidden control room, I discovered a dusty reel-to-reel tape recorder still operational. As I played the tape, the familiar distorted voice filled the room, but this time the message was clear, a desperate plea for help. The voice spoke of an experiment gone wrong, of a man trapped between dimensions, and of a force that had been unleashed, one that fed on fear and despair. Before I could piece it all together, the lights flickered and the door slammed shut. Trapped in that decaying station, I realized that the broadcast was not a mere anomaly, it was a warning. And as I listened to the final, blood-curdling words echo through the darkness, I understood that I had become part of the story. Somewhere in the static of that last broadcast lay the key to an ancient terror, one that was now reaching out to claim me as its next victim. Each of these stories is a reminder. Sometimes, the veil between our world and something far more sinister is thinner than we dare to imagine. Thank you for watching. See you next time.